All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Ginny Davis, and with me today is Ms. Gunter, who is one of our school social workers. And our topic today is academic peer pressure. Now, this is another topic that we come back to every year because I think it's really, really important. But it may be, so if you're new to us, this may be something that you're actually kind of unfamiliar in. What is academic peer pressure? And basically, I think the best way to explain it is this idea, if you've ever heard the expression keeping up with the Joneses, it's this idea that our teenagers take classes because their friends take the classes, they think that that's what they need to do, and they're more like looking at what they need to do in high school in comparison to their peers, as opposed to what's best for them personally. And when we talked about this last year, and we did this topic last year, we had a really interesting conversation because, here at Piedmont Hills, we have an interesting dynamic where we have a large chunk of kids where this is a big problem. But we have a smaller group, though still fairly sizable, that maybe we want to push to take more advanced classes because they're not living up, I hate the expression living up to their potential, but they could take more difficult classes and they're not pushing themselves. And so in high school, we want to have this balance where students aren't just coasting through and taking classes constantly that are too easy for them so that they have the better GPA. They do want to challenge themselves because that's what's going to help prepare them for college, is having, some challenges while they're still in high school. But at the same time, we don't want them to totally overwhelm themselves. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is how, as parents, we help our students make choices about their academic career, to keep that balance and so that they don't totally overwhelm themselves. Last week we had the counselors come and we talked about, the scheduling process and AP classes. So this is like purposeful placement of this topic right here this week. And then also, next week we're going to get into our book club, which this is the book we're reading. I'll talk more about this at the end today, where we're going to talk about how we support our kids through failure. So this is kind of like a theme for the month, you could say.
You timed it well. Perfect.
Yeah. So Ms. Gunter, what do you have for us? How you want to start out?
So I was a part of the AP, I don't know, AP night last week, or they're talking about AP classes with parents. And it's always my role to come in and talk about like the realities of what we see mental health wise. And so I like to hear about the positives of AP classes, because in my role, I don't hear a lot of that. So it's good for me to put into perspective of like, yes, it's very good for kids to challenge themselves. We talk about the stress curve, and we don't want kids to be underwhelmed. We don't want them to be overwhelmed. So it can be healthy for a lot of kids. So it is good for me to have that perspective of like, it's not all bad. My son is not going to be happy, but I did tell him I was going to talk about him. So my sophomore decided to take world history AP this, and he got into a class that was a lot of work. And he was like complaining about it a lot. He was like, having a really hard time. I was actually watching his mental health start to decline. And so I had asked him, and I had told him in the beginning, like, why do you want to take this class? We always ask students, like, are you really interested in history? Is this something that you really want to pursue? Or are you doing this because you felt pressured? And I asked him, I'm like, okay, I know you're feeling really overwhelmed, but like, I'm just curious as to like, why did you select this class? And he told me, he said, well, we were kind of all sitting at the table together when everybody was filling in their papers. And I looked around and all of my friends had put it on them and put it on their paper. And I realized if I don't, I'm the dumb friend. And I'm like, maybe you're all the dumb friends for making this choice based on each other, right? Like it was just kind of this interaction that we had. And so, there is peer pressure. I don't know if you all know this, but Piedmont has a reputation, and all of us parents have a reputation that comes along with it. And they think of, other schools have talked about like, oh, Piedmont, what kind of problems do you have over there? I know there's a lot of overachievers over there, and there's a lot of parents that push their kids to do really hard things that, make them struggle with their mental health. Like that is really what people talk about Piedmont. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I know there are parents that really push, but generally speaking, I feel like a lot of our pressure comes from peers, comes from one another, or even comes from the kiddo themselves. A lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect. When we think of anxiety, a lot of times people will think of like panic attacks and things like that. But the reality is like perfectionism is a symptom of anxiety. We have a lot of students who just feel the need to like perform and be perfect, and their value comes from their grades. Their value comes from being able to, pass these AP tests, things like that. And so, this year so far, the other social worker and I, we have about 210 referrals, which means people submitting referrals on students who they're worried about their mental health. And if I had to guess, because I don't know specifically, I would say academic pressure and anxiety is at least half of my referrals. So that means kiddos coming in with significant mental health issues, a lot of them stemming directly from that pressure to do well. So big issue, difficult to talk about, with kids, because I think a lot of times their self-worth comes from their grades. And so how do you, a kid that failed a class, like how do you talk to them about like, you're bigger than your grades and all these things when their core belief is that they're just tied to this grade. That's what they are. That's what they're worth. And so, basically with this presentation, I want to just reiterate like how we as parents can embrace our kiddos, pass or fail, to feel good about who they are, to praise their effort, to not put too much pressure on them because they're always putting pressure on themselves. So I don't know if you want me to share my screen or if you want to go through the presentation.
Whatever. Do you have it up and handy? I don't
think I did for a second. I'm sorry.
It's funny. Yvonne, your story. I have a similar story with my daughter when she was in high school, and she's like, "Oh, I have to take AP Bio." And I was like, why do you have to take AP Bio? And she was like, yeah, well, they just say that's what I need to take. And I'm like, who'd say? And she's like, well, like all my friends and everybody says you need to take AP Bio. And I'm like, Hannah, you don't like science. You don't want to be a doctor. Like there's no reason for you to take this class. You don't need it to get into college. You're not going to enjoy it. So why? Why? Like, and so that's, sometimes as a parent, like you have to question what decisions your child's making and be like, no, that's not, that's not what we're doing. So question in the chat, do students have some sort of overview about what the AP classes are like to help them plan their 4-year course plan? Yes, we've actually been doing that all this week. Hopefully ask your child if they've gone to any of the lunch meetings, because all last week, and then I feel like yesterday was the last one where they did math. So every day at lunch, they did a different subject area. So they started with like AP social studies, and then they did AP English. And so like every subject area had meetings at lunch where students could come in and learn about the classes and hear from the students. We didn't have just the teachers talking. We felt it was really important to have the students present about this is what it's actually really like to take this class. So hopefully ask your child if they went to any of those. Hopefully they did.
Because I have a new computer, I literally cannot share the presentation. So
I got it. Okay. Don't worry.
It's funny though, thinking about AP classes and all these stressors when you're talking about like other people's kids, but for me this year to be in that position of like, oh gosh, it's me now, was really tough because I felt like, do I make an executive decision based on how he is presenting mental health wise? Do I let him just fail? Like, what do I do? Which will tie us into our book club book.
Okay, ready?
Yes, thank you. Peer pressure. When we think about peer pressure, I always think of like kids telling other kids to do drugs and that kind of thing. But I think what we see mostly is that pressure to perform and be perfect and take tough classes. Of course, there's like negative behaviors that can happen, but in general, peer pressure can be a good thing, right? Oh, all my friends are studying, so I'm going to study too. So it can be negative or positive. And teenagers are the most influenced by one another. As egocentric as they are, as much as teenagers can be all about themselves, they really do care what other people think about them. Next slide, Ginny. So we talk about saying no. We tell students, or we tell our own children, like, say no to drugs, say no to hanging out with toxic friends. But we don't really talk about the dangers of saying yes. I don't know how many of you are, kind of like me, where it's like sometimes we say yes too much to the point that we're totally burned out. Like, I'm supposed to say yes, I want to be helpful. But do we really teach our kids that it's healthy boundary to say no? Right? We're taught about the dangers of saying no, but we're not taught about the dangers of saying yes, especially to more classes, to more commitments. I ask students all the time, like, what does your day look like? Tell me what your day looks like. And they're like, well, I run this club and I run this club, and then I go home and I play tennis. And then I signed up to volunteer and I have my AP classes. And I literally will like ask them, like, when do you rest? When do you do something fun for yourself? When do you take time to decompress? I tell students, like, I work from 8:30 to 4. I literally will go home and take a nap. Like, I need that hour to just decompress. But for our kids who are overcommitted, when do they have that time? And do we encourage them to do that?
I came across something, this concept of like saying no or saying yes constantly, and it kind of flipped this idea of saying yes on its head. And it was changing it to like, okay, you're going to say yes, but say yes to yourself. Like, put yourself first and make yourself the priority, which means like you're really getting in tune with, I am very tired, I need to take a nap, or I am very stressed, I need to take something off my plate, and just saying like yes to yourself rather than to others.
That's a great point. And I think we've talked about this before, Ginny, where we talk about like, I say no to my kids and I take time for myself. And my mom was a person who said yes to everything in regards to the kids. And she really neglected taking care of herself. And so her and I, we adore each other, but we always have this, difference of opinions when she's like, when I was parenting, I used to do all this and forget about my needs. And then I have to retort with like, well, when you were parenting, you had a heart attack when you were 44 because you were overstressed. So, it wasn't normalized for me to take care of myself. And so this is one of the things that I really try to instill in my kids. But then what I'm saying and what I'm wanting for them might be two different things. Like, I might be saying this, but then I come home and I hear my kid talking to his friend on the phone and I'm like, it's social time, you got to get your homework done, but like, I think it's important that we talk to them about the importance of taking care of themselves. One student sees their classmate signing up for 5 AP classes, which makes them feel like they also should without even considering their own needs. So make sure when kiddos are talking about what classes are going to take, like really asking them like, okay, how do we make sure that you have time for all the other things that are important? Social time, time to just unwind, time to sleep, time to just take care of yourself, time to, do something fun. When is that going to happen? And having those open conversations. Next slide. How influential are peer groups? Based on my son's experience with AP classes, very influential. And it's so interesting because one of the things that I notice about students is like, I'll have a student go into an AP class and they'll tell me that it's like the most difficult thing and that they are the only person struggling in that class and that everybody else seems to be handling it fine. But what they don't know is that I have 5 other kids from that same class coming and telling me the same thing, and they don't share that with one another. So typically when it comes to peer engagement and conversations, they're not always sharing with one another what they're struggling with. It's almost like a shameful thing to say, like, this class is really hard for me. If they would all be honest with one another, I think that sort of peer communication and pressure could be a healthy thing, where they're like, wow, we're all struggling with this. But I think they become very isolated because they're not forthcoming about things that are difficult. So going back to parenting, like, I think it is so important that we model the fact that things are hard and we struggle. And how do we get through that? Instead of pretending like everything's perfect. Says peer groups exert extraordinary influence during early adolescence on personal and academic goals. 14-year-olds are more likely to engage in risky behavior than 18 years old. 18-year-old high schoolers are highly responsive to peer behaviors and greatly desire fitting in. Like when we're talking about like teenage development, they're trying to find their place. This is the time in their life where they're becoming a little more autonomous and they're trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in. And so they're going to do all the things necessary to fit in with that peer group. So if their peer group is taking all these classes and performing really well, there's going to be a lot of pressure on that kid to fit in as well. I thought you were going to say something, Jenny. No.
No,
Okay.
I was just
Excellent.
nodding. Yes.
Yes, yes. Teens are attracted to peer groups with similar aspirational goals. And so, I'm very happy that my son has friends who, they all want to get into really good colleges and things like that, because it does kind of pressure him to do better. But I'm always watching for that balance of like, is he doing too much? Is it, is he working too hard? Is he getting his rest? Is he feeling good? Let's see, a student may feel the need to help provide for their family, so they might relate better to peers who understand that can help them get a job and earn money before considering college. Like depending on what your peers do, you might feel that need to do that. This is something that just came up in my house. Is my son is like, my friends are taking AP classes and they work. Like I should be able to do that too. And for me, I've kind of been not anti-working during high school, but I want my son to have that balance in his life and to feel good and not feel pressure to do things. So it's hard for me to like let him attempt all of these things and fail. Jenny, did your kids work during high school, or did Hannah work at all?
She did not during the school year. She did have a summer job, but not. I didn't let her work during the school year.
Yeah, this is kind of a difference of opinion that my husband and I have, because he, when we were growing up, he started working like the moment he turned 15 and a half. He got through school. He worked like on the weekends. He didn't have much of a social life. And he talks about that being such a pivotal part of him being like financially responsible and, having good work ethic. And so I know there's like positive things to it. Throw in the chat what you
know
guys
what I just lied to you, Yvonne, because now I'm actually remembering what happened in our life.
Okay, what happened?
She did. Her senior year, she did have a job. The difference was her senior year was the year that we were shut down.
Okay.
And so she wasn't doing sports because they didn't really have sports that year, because she was a wrestler. And so like where other sports came back, wrestling never really did, because, COVID, you're like right up in somebody's face with wrestling. Yeah. And so she did, but because that was the balance, because whereas before her practices, because she basically did wrestling year round. It stuck up, and so like it was like, yeah, you don't have time for a job, but when she didn't have that, she worked at See's Candy, and so we ate a lot of See's Candy that year.
I remember that was so cute.
We ate a lot of chocolate.
Yeah, I'm curious what other people think about this, because it's like when we're talking about academic stress and pressure, it's like there's not that many hours in the day, and so depending on their course load, I hear students say they work on homework for an hour, and then I hear students say they work on homework for 6 hours. So for me, like what I see is there's this huge spectrum of how much time they're actually spending on school stuff. So as a parent, like I do kind of step in when I feel like he's overcommitting himself, because I don't want him to become overwhelmed. So yeah, just curious what people thought about that. I don't think it's good or bad, or there's a right or wrong answer, but just for me personally with my kiddos, I know his threshold for stress, and I really try to like help him manage that, which isn't always fun for him.
Competition culture. All right.
What is healthy when it comes to competition culture? Like, it's so hard to find that balance. And I'm not even here to say that like, oh, I have the perfect answer for this, because I don't. But I do think being competitive is healthy. Like, I think that drives us, right? Like when I see Ginny's exercise rings close in the morning, I'm like, I got to get out and do the same thing, right? So that's good. You're like competitive. But when is it healthy and when is it not healthy? Like if you were to ask your kids, like, is it okay? Do you feel okay when you're not in first place? Like, how do you feel when that happens? What's healthy is not getting first place and being okay with it. Not getting the best grade on the test and being okay with it. Students are motivated to learn, grow, and try again. students can celebrate other students' achievements. This was a big one, like right when COVID was happening, and a lot of the colleges were impacted. And there was some really tough conversations I had with students about their friends getting into colleges when they didn't, like how to be happy for somebody else. And I think it stemmed from them being so hard on themselves that it was hard to take the perspective of somebody else and be happy for them. If you can be happy for somebody else doing something well, I think that kind of indicates that you're in a good space for yourself, right? Like if I'm feeling okay about myself, I can be happy that, Ginny's on her bike in the morning, right? If I'm doing my thing and feeling content with that. But if I'm not in a good space, that might be, an issue for me. So it's healthy if you're able to celebrate other people's achievements. It's healthy if students can collaborate rather than compete in group projects. Group projects are always a hot topic in my office too. Students commit to their sports and activities because they're genuinely enjoying them. College isn't the only motive for joining extracurriculars. I have had students tell me, like, I don't even like tennis, but I needed something active to put on my college resume. I don't even know what the Key Club does, but I'm the leader of it because I needed something to put on my college resume. So really, if kids are in a healthy space, you'll see them doing things because, they actually have passion towards them or want to do them. If your kid hates history and they're taking WAP, is that a really good space for them? I'm not sure. Next slide, Ginny.
Sorry, I'm answering something in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What is unhealthy? Excessive focus with being at the top. When students come in and start talking about grades, I always have to ask clarifying questions because they're like, I'm doing terrible in this class. And I'm like, well, what does terrible mean for you? Because for some people that means F, and for some people that means A-. So figuring out, like, are they in a healthy space or an unhealthy space? Like, are they excessively focused with a specific grade? Are they excessively focused with being the top of the class? Are they excessively focused on getting validation from their peers and teachers about their performance? Unhealthy would also be not focusing enough on their personal effort and growth. And this is when we talk about like a growth mindset, right? We don't just praise the grade, we praise the effort behind it, right? Like, I know you got to be on the test, but I did see you study a lot and I'm really glad that you tried so hard. Like, is different than why didn't you get an A, right? We want to praise the effort so that it encourages students to continue to grow. Unhealthy would be students engaging in extracurriculars to look good or stand out and not because they enjoy it. And then college being the only motivation for things. Like, my hope for our students is that they have a positive experience at Piedmont, that they make friends, that they challenge themselves, that they learn something, that they enjoy learning, and that they are prepared to go to college or do something productive in their life. And a lot of times I don't feel like that's happening because students are super hyper focused on what school they're going to go to, competing with family members. My sister went to Berkeley, so I have to do this. It's like, I really want students to just embrace high school, enjoy it, and leave with at least some positive memories.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I changed the slide.
No. The effects of unhealthy competition culture. Making less than 100% of first place leads to a sense of failure or poor self-esteem. So when I first started working at Piedmont, people kind of gave me a hard time of like, and I mentioned this in the beginning of like, what problems could possibly be going on at Piedmont? And one of the things that I had to really start to understand, because for me, being in high school, I played sports, my grades were pretty average, and I was totally okay with it. And I went to college and things were, it worked out. So it took a minute for me to take the perspective of students who were completely broken down by like bad grades. And one of the things I learned is really how much their worth is tied to their grade. Like when I've had students tell me, like, when a teacher tells me that I did something wrong or that I wasn't able to, get an A because I missed a few things, I feel like it's personal to my entire being. And that one took a long time for me to understand. I'm like, wait, but there's so much more about you. And they're like, I don't know what it is, but I just feel like I'm completely tied to this. And if I can't get 100% in this, then what is the point? I have no worth. I have no value. And so for me, that was a weird thought. Ginny, I don't know how you were in high school. Was school and grades, was that something that was super important to you?
No. No, it wasn't. I think because I didn't have pressure. I mean, first off, I want to say things were different then. I mean, I know that. So like when I was a kid, things were different. But it was 30 years ago when I was in high school. And first off, to get into college, it was not nearly as competitive as it is now. And so I was the type of student that if I had really like buckled down and pushed myself, yeah, I could have gotten A's. But with just like, minimal effort, I got B's and I was fine with that. And my parents were fine with that. Like B's were totally acceptable in my house. And I did what I could to get B's. I was a solid B student. And I got into college, like no problem. Like today now with how competitive it is, like, I don't know if I would have gotten into the college that I got into now. And that's, this goes to the, this comment that's in the chat, which I'll read. Thank you for this session. It's great. I'm wondering if the message conversation we're having today is had with the students also. How much of this message is reinforced to bring home the point? How is it the pressure amongst high school kids is so high? What are your thoughts on changing the culture per se with constant reinforcement of messages, considering you're saying it's peer pressure that has the max effect? I agree, totally. And that's the whole reason we're talking about this, because I think that I don't like what we're saying, that peers are very influential. So are parents. Actually, parents are more influential than the peers. We don't really realize the impact that we have on our kids, but we are by far the most influential presence in their life. And so that's why starting with this, I realize that this conversation is not just Piedmont Hills, it's our wider effort. Like I just said, colleges are more competitive. Like it just, we have something that's happened in the past, and I want to say it was like the past 20 years in our society, where there's now this idea that like you have to go to college. If you're going to get a good job, you have to go to college. And so that has just made it like so much more pressure and so much more competitive. And I see, having a child that's in 8th grade and middle school, like I see it where there's this like pressure in middle school, like they're already thinking about college. And to me, that is ridiculous. I appreciate, there was comments about the 4-year plan and finalizing the 4-year plan in the chat. 4-year plans are never finalized. So I as a system in a high school district, we want our students to come in with a 4-year plan. So they map out, like, this is their plan to graduate. This is their plan to, if I want to go to college, this is what my plan is to get there. I don't disagree with that philosophy. And I see the benefit of it. At the same time, I think it's absurd that we're asking our freshmen in high school to do everything possible to get into college. They are 14 years old. They're children. And I think that we're putting too much pressure on our teenagers to become instant adults and not enjoy their teenage years. Like this comment right here on the screen, like poor work-life balance. I think that's something that's really important that we need to teach our kids. These are conversations that we're having as a staff. Our big focus as a staff for the past, since I've become principal, is social emotional learning and developing relationships with the students so that, when they're stressed, they can go to the teacher and talk to them about it and like talk about that balance and how do they achieve it. I think every teacher would agree with this message. This is something that we talk about the staff. We see, the pressure and how competitive it is, and we don't like it. But changing a culture takes time. I will say, this is my 5th year as principal. I think it's better today at Piedmont Hills than it was in 2018 when I started. I'm starting to see the benefit, that the results of all this work. It's a slow change. Changing culture takes time. It's does not happen instantly, but I'm starting to see it. So yeah, I feel like I like went off on a tangent. I kind of like
No, it's
went
good.
off.
It's true. It's true. I think, the message that, we send our children, I send my children is like, we live in the Bay Area. It's so expensive to live here. If you don't go to college, I mean, you better figure out something really good, because otherwise you're going to have to move to Oklahoma. I mean, like literally like these things that they hear all the time. And so, I always validate like, yes, I understand the desire to, go to a good college and all these things. But I think one of the jobs that we have as a school, as parents, is to remind our children that not only people who went to Berkeley and Stanford are successful. Some of the most successful people I know went to San Jose State. They went to, they went to other state schools. And I think that's something that maybe students don't understand. Like a lot of times, like you said, freshmen, I really make it a practice not to ask freshmen, like, what are you going to do with your life? What are your plans? Because that puts pressure on them, like they're supposed to know. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life until I was 30. So I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I hope kids have a better plan than I did, but in general, like the thought that a 14-year-old should have a life plan, I think about what I was doing when I was 14 years old. I was rollerblading and hanging out with my friends. I could not tell you one thing that I learned in school. I doubt I had any conversations about college, and I had a pretty good childhood. So for me, that worked for me. So I do validate the worries about like, maintaining your life and, being able to pay your bills and raise a family and all these things. So I think when it comes to culture, it's like, that is part of the culture because it is expensive. It is a different time. There are things that we need to worry about, but I think it is important to remind our kids that like, you can be successful if, God forbid, you have to go to community college. Like you can still get where you want to be. There's not just one path to success. And I think that's something that a lot of people just don't understand. Like I don't want to disappoint my family and go to community college, or I don't want to, not get into colleges that my friends get into. It's like, you can still be successful. I always ask people like, people that I've deemed as being like successful, or they've gone on to make a lot of money. Like, what was your educational background? Like, what did that look like? What would have been different, you think, if you went to like a better school? And I don't, everybody's journey is different. I think it's good to just like reinforce that. Like, it's okay if you don't do this. Like, that would be great if you get into Stanford. That's fantastic. But just remember, there's other ways and avenues to get there. So just relieve a little bit of that pressure, but it's a tough one. Other effects of unhealthy competition is just like, it's that comparison. Like, I should be able to do this because so-and-so did this. Like my sister did this, so I feel like I'm supposed to do that too. It doesn't allow people to be happy with their best effort, right? My best effort may never be as good as Ginny's effort, right? But that doesn't mean that my effort isn't worth anything. Other effects are, like you said, poor work-life balance, inability to appreciate growth and acknowledge mistakes as being normal. This is a huge one that we need to model for our kids. Mistakes are normal. We are all learning and growing throughout our lives. And if we show our kids that we can fail and get back up and keep pursuing things, I think that would be a great way to support them.
Well, sometimes it's not even like mistakes, like yes, mistakes, but sometimes you just don't do as well. Like you studied, you did the same thing, but like this test, for whatever reason, the concept was more difficult. You just didn't score as high. Like that's not necessarily a mistake. That's just a reality. That's where you are right now. But if you tried your best for where you are right now, that's what's important.
Totally. And I'll always ask students like, okay, what did you learn from that? They're like, well, I should have studied differently, or should have asked more questions, or I should have done the study guide, or whatever it is. So like, as long as you're learning from it, nobody has to be perfect. And it's so, like I said, it's so hard to convince people of that. Like when they've had A's all their life and all of a sudden they're in 11th grade and they get their first B, and it just seems like the most devastating thing in the whole world. It's like, how do you talk to somebody to make them feel like it's okay to accept that?
Yeah.
Right. Relationships revolve around keeping up with or being better than the other. Lots of competition culture. Students learn to only retain information for an exam and then flush it out of their brain. I always ask my kids, like, what are you learning? Like when we come home from school, right? I'm like, what did you learn today? How did that go? What was cool about that? Like, how do those kind of things. The thought of just like memorizing stuff for an exam breaks my heart because there's so much cool stuff to learn. Like I'm like a lifelong learner. I'm always reading. I'm always going to trainings. Like I want to learn so much. And so I really want to help my kids develop that too, that love for learning, and not just we just don't retain information just so that we can, regurgitate it on a paper. So how do we help develop that love of learning? Other effects, this is what we see: excessive amounts of stress, fear, and anxiety. I have students who are high performing, who something happens in class where they get a bad grade on something, creates a lot of anxiety, even to the point sometimes of like an anxiety attack. And then we start to get avoiding that class. We have several students where we have to really support them in getting back into the classroom after something that they perceive as being a failure. Students start to become really insecure and give up. Some people's reaction to failure is to freeze or to just withdraw. And that's something that we work a lot with students, of like getting back in there and trying again. Like you give it your best effort. Maybe you didn't this time, you learned something. Like, how do we get you back in there to do this? Saying no. Is it saying no to themselves, saying no to their peers, saying no to their parents? I think it's a little bit of all of that. Students can learn to weigh their options and recognize when they realistically cannot commit to a class workload. Do you remember those timesheets that the counselors used to give? I don't know what they were called. It was basically like when you're going to take an AP class, you fill on the sheet, like, will I be able to have 8 hours of sleep if I take this course, given that it might take 2 hours a night to do the homework? So just figuring out if it's even feasible. Can I still make times to enjoy things that I enjoy? I had a student tell me a couple of weeks ago, we were talking and I was like, what do you do that you enjoy? And the student said, well, I plan on enjoying things when I get through high school. And I'm like, well, what is going to happen when you go to college? Like, then what? He's like, well, I said, are you going to enjoy things then? Because there's going to be a lot of classes and you're going to be really busy. And they're like, well, then, I got to do what I have to do. So then I'm going to enjoy things when I am a grown up and I'm working. And I'm like, what if your job comes with a lot of responsibility? I'm like, do you see where we're going here? Like, I need to know that you are going to have something enjoyable, because it's always going to be, the work is always going to be there. And I stress the importance of balance. I know I've done a life wheel. I don't know if I did it with you, Jenny, a life wheel. And basically it's like it's a circle with like 8 pie pieces, and each piece represents a part of somebody's life. And so there's like your environment, your spirituality, your friendships, your family, your health, your mental health, fun time, friendship time, all these things. And what we do is we have kids kind of grade themselves on how much energy they're putting into each of those pie pieces. They're all equally important, but we tend to hyper focus on a few, maybe like relationships and grades. And so one of the things that I always want people to do is to determine if they have enough time to keep that wheel in balance, to make sure that they're putting equal energy into all these different components of their life. They're all important. Grades are the most important to them. But when we're talking about like being healthy and happy, the people who are the most balanced tend to have the better moods, less anxiety. So that question of, can you still make time to do things like take care of yourself, like sleep, like hang out with your friends, like spend time with your family, clean your room, like all those things? Do we still have that time?
Yeah. And I have those life wheels when I send out the video this afternoon of this meeting, I'll link them.
Yeah. And take one for yourself and
Yeah,
show
I actually,
that.
because I have 2 versions. They're actually linked. If you guys have ever been on our website in the principals page, they're actually linked on there. So I'll just share them with you guys, but they are on there. There is like the life wheel, and then there's a specific one for adolescents.
I think we should do ours today, Jenny.
Okay, we should. Absolutely. And I wanted to add on to this. I don't know, because I don't know how many parents actually see our school newspaper, but I write a column for the school newspaper every issue. And a couple of months ago, it was in the first semester, I wrote about the importance of sleep. that, we have this new bell schedule, and that the reason that the state of California changed the start time to 8:30 was that teenagers aren't getting enough sleep. Like, that's the whole reason for this start time change. And so I, wrote this column, gave tips on, it's kind of the same stuff when we did the parent Zoom about sleep, same type of stuff that we talked about that I wrote in this article.
Mhm.
And so Mr. Brown, who's the journalism teacher, told me, he's like, oh yeah, the kids, they like took exception to your article. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, they were like, she just doesn't understand. There's no way we can get more sleep. And he was like, and I just told him, like, guys, she's got some pretty good tips. Maybe you need to like look at your life and make some choices. Like, and so that's just like what I see with our teenagers is a lot of times, because they're trying to shove everything in, they're sacrificing their sleep. And that can, like, that's why we talk about the importance of sleep. That can lead to so many, increased anxiety and depression and just all of these like mental health, like, bombs that like just, can really hurt them. It really, a lot of times drives back down to sleep. And that's kind of like when you say, like, I need to take 5 AP classes. What are you sacrificing? You're probably sacrificing sleep.
Yeah.
Number
There
one.
is no amount of therapy I can provide to anybody that's better than a full night of sleep.
It's true.
Have a chat with those journalism kids.
I know. A lot of them are AP kids too.
Oh, of course, of course. All right, next slide is don't always say yes. This is our part. This is our homework right here. Encouraging our kids to participate in things that are stress-free. Not about school, not about college prep, not about our college applications. When is the last time we have encouraged our kids to do something that is not related to school? I can only answer this one because my son loves video games, and I was literally sick of seeing him in the house play video games. And I said, I need you to call up some friends and I will drop you at the mall. I don't know what you're going to do there. You can walk around, I'll give you some money, but I need you to leave the house with other humans. So that was a couple of weeks ago. So that was probably the first time I did that, though. It's not really something I do. I am guilty of asking questions about school. Did you do your homework? Did you turn this in? Did you talk to Mr. So-and-so? Like, I'm kind of annoying. So I was very proud of myself for saying that. So for the rest of you, when was the last time you encouraged your kiddo to participate in something that was stress-free, not related to school? Or maybe you haven't, and maybe that's something that's going to happen this week.
Let me move on. Do you want me to answer that question?
I want you to answer that question.
I actually am probably somebody that should stress academic stuff more.
Hey, that's fair. That's
because I just don't.
Talking about Nathan.
Especially because my son's not in high school yet, 8th grade, and I'm like, it's fine. You'll be okay. It's fine.
Finding that balance. Setting regular times to spend with family or to relax. I think it's important. Let's go for a walk. Let's do something. If your kids are anything like mine, they're going to tell you no, but at least putting that out there, giving them options to do that. Allowing our kiddos to make mistakes and explore different interests. We talked about sparks. Was that last week or a couple of weeks ago? And sometimes the thing that gets your kid motivated or excited is something that's not exciting for you. I don't want to play video games. I don't want to play Call of Duty, but I know that's something that's important for him. This is a crucial time for development. And development requires sleep and being healthy overall. So it's not always about grades in college. So let's make sure that we're validating that, normalizing that.
Mm-hmm.
Questions to ask ourselves. What subtle messages am I sending my kids? What is the first thing I ask them after school? I'm getting better, but this is a very conscious effort to get better. I blow this all the time. And I think I mentioned this in another talk of like, I asked my youngest, how was school? Did you turn anything in? If I sign in, am I going to see that there's missing assignment? Like, that's our conversation after school. Like, how annoying is that? Like, and then he shuts down, doesn't say anything, and then we get mad at each other. Like, I could do that better. So what are those messages you're sending? What are the first questions that we're asking?
Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, next slide, Julie. If the first question is, how did you do on the test? You might be implying that grades matter more than anything else. I mean, if your kiddo's saying like, I'm excited about this test, I know I'm going to nail it, then of course, like, hey, how did you do on that test is different. But maybe instead asking, how was your day? Did you learn anything interesting? Did you get to spend time with friends? What did you do at lunch? Something like that. Might be a little bit different, and it sends a different message. It sends a message that you're important as a whole, not just how you performed or how you did, but like, I want to make sure that you're enjoying your experience in high school.
Yeah, I think that if there's one thing I would want parents to change and what they could do to like this, topic that we're talking about, and like, how do we change this culture rather than asking how you doing in school, which implies grades, asking, what are you learning in school? And that's just a change of one word, but what are you learning in school, and have that focus be on what they're studying and what they're learning about. Is that, I think, we are so grade driven, and like, it's something that's like hard to change. And I have teachers that are really wanting to change this culture, but it's hard because everything's focused on grades, and that's really hard to change that perspective. But if we could focus more on what we're learning, I think that we all would be better for it.
Definitely. So what can we do? What can we do as parents? Encourage our kids to unwind, take some time, give them a break after school. I remember my mom always gave me like a half an hour after school to do whatever I needed to do before she started nagging about my homework. And so that's something that I try to do. Like we go home, we get something to eat, and then I let them unwind for a little bit and then do their homework. Sometimes it's hard to transition back, so that's a whole nother issue. And then remembering, like, regardless of how old they are, they still need downtime. Like I need downtime. Like I said, I go home, I lay down, I spend time by myself, I hang out with my dog. I have to have that before I can transition into like mom has to cook person, like I need that time for myself. And so sometimes I forget that my kids do too. I have been guilty of, let's go home, get everything done. Don't make me, check your school loop again or whatever, like guilty. So for myself, this is, more of a lesson for me than for anyone, I'm sure, but like, regardless of how old they are, they still need that time. Foster a healthy definition of success. What does success mean to you? Is it that they get a good job and go to a great college and make tons of money? Like, what is successful to you? Discuss what you value the most. Is health important, compassion, integrity, not just, financial success. So what does that look like? And how can we encourage our kids to think that way as well? Remember that kids' success is measured over the course of a lifetime, not just at the end of the semester. I always tell students, I want my goals for you to be happy, healthy, and successful. And by successful, it depends on what, we want, like, but I want you to feel like you are growing and evolving always. Like we're always constantly growing and evolving. And I want to make sure that students know there's not like some end result of like, okay, you made it, you're successful. Like we're continually growing. So not just the end of the semester, but in life, what are we doing to, be the best versions of ourselves that we can be? Next slide. Act as a cheerleader and supporter for your team. Show an active interest in the content that your child is learning. I have a tendency, especially with my youngest one who doesn't really care much for school, to kind of shut down and stop checking in on what he does because I know it's going to give me stress. So Miss Pereira kind of gets on me. She's like, did you check your kids' stuff? And I'm like, I just don't want it to exist, so really taking a more active part in, getting him excited about what he's learning. Debunk the myth that only the most prestigious colleges will lead to success. Again, I went to community college. I consider myself successful because I have the perfect job. I know a lot of people that did. Work with your child to develop a schedule that will allow them time to complete homework and study while attending activities and getting adequate sleep. This one is so hard because teenagers have their own minds. They have their own decisions. We can't force them to go to bed at a certain time. We can force them to go to the bedroom, but we can't force them to go to sleep. So really just showing them like, I have a tendency to stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning, getting things done. And then I get up really early. I don't sleep that much. And so my kids see that. And they've even told me like, well, why do I have to go to bed if you don't? Like, you're still functioning and doing this. Like, why are you always on us to do that? And so again, back to that modeling, like what are we modeling for our kids that is healthy or not healthy? So working with them, talking with them, being open with them, and modeling for them. Next slide, Jenny.
I think that's the last slide.
Is that the last slide?
Yeah.
So that's what I have. Again, this is a hot topic for me just because I get students all the time that are just completely overwhelmed and stressed. And, you know, I have to think as a parent of like, what can I do to help? I can't do the assignments because a lot of them are out of my scope. They're harder than I ever had in school. But just encouraging them that there's so much more to you than school. And hearing it from a parent, like you said, we are the most influential people in their lives, can be really impactful. So
yeah, so I want to plug the book that we're going to be reading. So hopefully you guys, I put it on my newsletter. I should have put it on my newsletter a couple weeks ago. So I apologize for that because I was like, "Ooh, February is right around the corner." So it's called The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey. It's a really great book. It's not a difficult read. It's actually it's a fast read. It's really enjoyable. We'll spend the next 3 weeks talking about it. And what I'm going to do, so in my newsletter where I always post the topics, this week I'll post like some questions that we'll go over. So even if you don't have a chance to get to the book or you're behind in the reading, don't worry. Like you can still participate in the conversation. It's like very like broad general stuff, but this is a really, so we did this book a couple years ago. We did it the year that we were on distance learning. And both of our oldest kids, Yvonne, were in high school at the time. They're now in college. And so I feel like my focus in academics is like a lot on more my youngest child now. And so whereas when I first read this book, I was more thinking about my oldest child. And so I'm curious about what new things I get out, which is why I wanted to redo this book, because I think it's really valuable. I find that in these talks, I refer to stuff that I learned in this book all of the time. I really love this book. So that's why we're redoing it.
I am so proud of our oldest, by the way. Like thinking back when we started reading that book and where they were, and I was afraid my kid wasn't going to graduate, and seeing him evolve as a young man. Like he's 19 now and responsible, and I'm so proud of him. And when I was reading that book, I was so worried. And he fell flat quite a few times, and I'm so glad that I allowed him to. So yay for our babies.
So hopefully I want to, like, if you guys can pick up this book, I put the link on Amazon in my newsletter to it. I don't know if you guys are Amazon believers like I am. I probably single-handedly support Amazon.
Every day on my porch.
But okay, so thank you guys. I will send out the life wheel in my email when I send out the recording of this. So look for that. But thank you guys for enjoying and participating in this topic. So
thank you.
All right, great. Everybody have a wonderful day.